So welcome everyone to our roundtable on menstrual justice this December 20th at 7 p.m. Everyone is just entering the room right now. Here we are just after 7 o'clock. Just about to get started. Slowly warming ourselves up. Trying to see if once we hit like the max number of people who are like joining as we go. All right. So tonight, we have some very exciting people that we're going to be talking to, but briefly, our agenda is just a bit of event housekeeping, welcome and introductions, the actual roundtable, that's where we'll be spending most of our hour, and then a bit of Q&A at the end. So this event is sponsored by Beacon Gallery and JArts. Honored to have them on board. It is being recorded. That means that if you miss it, if you miss the beginning, if you can't stay for the whole thing, or if you're having technical difficulties, you can find it after the fact on YouTube. You can also send us a message if you need to access it in another manner. We have the chat feature available. That is the best place to put your questions that you may have. I know that there's the Q&A as well, but we're mostly going to be looking at the chat. You're welcome to put in your comments and questions through the entire event. Someone is already testing it out right now. Laura, welcome, the director of JArts. We are so happy to have you here and everyone else with us as well. And then we have, just so everyone's aware, the show that has accompanied and kind of like been behind all of this is Karen Tabb's Humanity is Not a Spectator Sport, which is on view at Beacon Gallery through the 17th of January. And What Now? Making Space, which is curated by Meclina, our moderator this evening, is also on view through the 17th of January. And Anita Diamant's Period End of Sentence, published by Simon & Schuster, is available wherever books are sold. So just briefly about Beacon Gallery. We are a contemporary art gallery located in Boston South End. I am Christine O'Donnell, the owner and director of Beacon Gallery. I opened the gallery in 2017. We focus on activism and social justice, and concretely this means exhibitions around themes of feminism, immigration, and increasing representation of our society in the art world. In addition, it means deconstructing the art world's cult of elitism through accessibility, transparency, and education. JArts, our co-sponsor for this evening, brings people together to explore and celebrate the diverse world of Jewish art, culture, and creative expression. Art, food, literature, music, and more allow us to better understand the life experiences of others, as well as of our own, and help to build a vibrant and more tolerant future for both our Jewish and greater Boston communities. JArts launched publicly in December 2015 with Boston's first ever Jewish public art project, 8 Nights, 8 Windows. So currently on view at Beacon Gallery, we'll have a chance to see a little bit of this in a minute, is Caron Tabb's Humanity is Not a Spectator Sport. Come and have a look during our open hours, which you can find online, or you can make an appointment to come in. In addition, we have our companion exhibition, What Now? Making Space, 2 photos of which are below, curated by Meclina. Also on view through January 17th with a rotating series of works. Our moderator for this evening is Meclina. She is the curator of What Now? Making Space. She is a curator, painter, calligrapher, and micrographer, a very accomplished artist. She's originally from Massachusetts and is a recent returnee from Florida. She's involved with many nonprofits focusing on art and equity. She is a fellow and art director for the James Weldon Johnson Foundation, a board member for diversity and inclusion at the Museum of Fine Arts in Tampa, an advisor for the Kaleidoscope Project, and a co-founder for the Community Art Collaborative. So with that, I'm going to change the slide so we can see a photograph of Caron Tabb's piece, What Now? Making Space. And I'm going to hand it over to Meclina, who is going to introduce us to our guests. Thank you all.
Thank you, Christine, so much for that introduction. And before we dive deeper into the conversation this evening, I would like each one of our panelists to do a brief introduction of themselves. We'll start off with Karen, and then Sasha, Anita, and then Bria. So Karen, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to these days?
Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Tam. I'm sitting here in my studio. The photo you just saw is a piece called We All Bleed Red. I was born in South Africa, in apartheid South Africa. I grew up in Israel and have lived in the US for the last 20 years. And after a very long career in the nonprofit world, I turned to art. And my art is very much inspired by my life journey in 3 countries that are experiencing a huge amount of turmoil and unjust and unequal circumstances for many of its people. And my art really focuses on my personal story, but very much on universal issues around immigration, gender equity, racial justice, and mental health, and many other more.
Thank you, Karen. And Sasha?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sasha GoodFriend. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the executive director of Mass Now. Mass Now is the Massachusetts chapter of the National Organization for Women, and we have been fighting to pass feminist policy for over 50 years in Massachusetts. In some ways, it feels like, and it is, that we are fighting for the same issues as when we were founded over 50 years ago. And I just want to give a shout out to some of the Mass Now members I see who have joined us here: Anisha, Christine, Nancy. We would love for you to join the Mass Now movement to help us pass the I Am bill, which is an acronym to increase access to menstrual products. And Mass Now has been fighting to pass this bill since we helped introduce it in 2019, and it would make menstrual products free in all schools, prisons, and shelters. So excited to have joined the conversation tonight with this fantastic group of feminists. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Sasha. Anita.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anita Diamond. I'm a writer. I've lived in the Boston area for a very long time, since 1975. And I think I'm best known as a novelist, but I started work here as a journalist. And the reason I'm here today is because I wrote a nonfiction book called Period End of Sentence, which you can't see because I'm blurred. It was inspired by the film Period End of Sentence, which was produced by a small group, the PAD Project in California. And while I was aware of menstrual injustice, I dove in very deeply over the course of about 9 months during COVID to do research on sort of an overview of the cultural history of menstruation, the injustices that are being visited upon many, many people, and the movement, the very exciting movement for menstrual justice, which is being led by young people. So I got very mad and very inspired during my research on this book, and lovely to be here. And it was great seeing the show, Karen. All of it is really quite moving. And of course, We All Bleed Red just hit the nail on the head for all of us here tonight.
Thank you so much, Anita. And Bria.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bria Gadsden. I am your period champion. I am a true advocate for all things menstruation and menstrual equity. Born and raised in Boston, but now I am a Connecticut transplant. So if anyone is in Connecticut, definitely connect with me. Also, feel free in the chat to say where you're coming from. I love to connect with folks and see where you're tuning in from. I got started in this back in 2019, where I am the co-founder and executive director of Love Your Menses. We promote menstrual equity through menstrual education, resource connection, and mentorship. I have to give so much credit to my mentor who passed away, Irving Goldson. She is truly golden and the reason why I do this work each and every day for my sisters across the world who bleed red. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation and on this panel with these amazing people who are true advocates for menstrual justice.
Thank you so much, Bria. You know, as we begin to dive into this conversation, you know, there's a comedic resiliency that's developed over time with menstruation. We quickly learn how to navigate the inconvenient times when Aunt Flo comes to visit. We're able to go in our cabinet that's fully stocked, get our supplies, and take a breath. There's also this like secret code when you go to the bathroom and a stranger all of a sudden becomes this confidant, or they come to you like, hey girl, do you have something? And you know, I didn't know I was gonna start it. And it's an amazing type of relationship that happens with us behind those closed doors. And that's just sadly not the case for everyone. There are menstruators who are in shelters, in prisons, who suffer with economic struggles, where being able to find products that they need becomes a constant struggle financially, emotionally. And, you know, we have to look at how are these really looking at the social determinants of health, right? And how it's affecting these young menstruators, young NO for those who are incarcerated or otherwise, or homeless. So we're gonna dive in a little deeper into this conversation, and it's really gonna be a natural flow. As Christine stated, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And so once we kind of go through this round table, we will open it up to the audience for all of your questions and answers. But I want to start off with Karen as we're here at the gallery and we're looking at her really intriguing piece that we all bleed red. My question to you, Karen, is how do you see art as a vehicle to normalize, support, and engage with the public perception of menstrual injustice?
So I think that art in all of its forms, and for me in particular, the medium of visual arts has the capacity to create dialogue where often the threshold for entry into these conversations might be a little steep. I focus a lot in the gallery work currently on view right now on issues about about my white privilege, about racial injustice, and those are sometimes issues that are very hard to enter and engage in conversation about. So for me, from the very beginning of my art career, which is not that long, I've only been an artist for the last 8 or 9 years, art has been a way to open up dialogue. Through viewing a piece, you can ask not only the viewer questions, I can ask the viewer, but I can also ask myself. And primarily, I use my art very selfishly to further delve into and engage in issues of identity, of my own and of the people around me. But I also think that it offers an opportunity for people to really reevaluate concepts, notions, misconceptions that they hold about themselves. And so through the art, I'm asking people to come along on this journey with me. The title of the show, Humanity is Not a Spectator Sport, is a riff off this idea that democracy is not a spectator sport. It was coined by Louis Scharfman, who was the founder of the Women's League of Voters here in Massachusetts. She was a Holocaust survivor. And she believed, as I do believe, that as in democracy, humanity is not a spectator sport. In order for our humanity to survive and thrive in a way where people are equal and treated as such, we need to participate. We need to pick up the mantle. We need to do our part. We all have something to give, and we need to figure out what it is that we have. What is that gift that we that we give. So for me, art serves as an opportunity to engage the viewer in those conversations. And I know that in this day and age, with so many issues, we're being bombarded day in and day out with issues and problems, and it's almost so overwhelming that it's so easy to shut off. I want people to feel as if they have the power to do one thing: pick up the mantle around one issue. We all have that gift to give. And if I can, and this has happened time and time again in the gallery around conversations with the work, where people feel inspired to go home and think about the issue, that one issue that they care about most, and figure out a way in which they can use their gift to change and bend the arc of justice.
Well said. I think it's amazing. You and I had a wonderful conversation a few months back about, you know, how are we participating? How are we creating space and pushing that needle forward to have new conversations? And it's an important one. And Anita, I'm gonna kind of turn to you for a moment with your background in journalism, and that you let your mad turn into action, that your anger became the inspiration to launch this newest work that you've published. And you were sharing earlier that you were inspired by the PAD project, and now having period, end of sentence. And my question to you is, what was that common thread you found when researching about menstrual injustice? And I'm just curious, I think we all are, right? Did you discover that there was this invisible thread that's connecting kind of all of these different stories of girls and women who are menstruating, people who menstruate, have in common?
Thanks. That's quite a request. But you talked to me earlier about it, so I thought about it a little bit. And I think the through line is misogyny, actually. And I know there are people who menstruate who don't identify as female, but because menstruation is so closely identified with women, I think the prejudice and the stigma around menstruation is very much identified with women and girls. So I'm going to use that language. Misogyny is a kind of ingrained prejudice against women and girls. And where it comes from and how it's expressed, I think, varies from one culture to another, from one time period to another. But it is an expression of control, and it's also a way of staying in control and keeping in power. It's about power. And the less powerful a menstruator is in the rest of her life, or in the rest of their life, the worse it is for them. So if you are homeless and menstruating, if you are a refugee and menstruating, if you're incarcerated, if you're poor, if you're a woman of color and menstruating, you are at more risk around your health, your ability to take care of your bodily functions, your ability to stay clean and healthy, and your ability to access health care for your uterus. Those of us with uteruses have particular health needs. And so I think misogyny married together with racism, with the power structure, with healthcare as a business rather than a right, all of those things mixed together. But I do believe the through line is misogyny. There are examples throughout the world, which was one of the delightful things I learned, in some indigenous cultures, not all, but in many, I think, and I'm sure there are more than one I learned about, where men and women have a much more equal sense of power, shared power, and shared agency in their lives and in the way they live. And in those cultures, menstruation, and particularly menarche, when someone gets their period for the first time, is everybody knows what's going on, and it's celebrated because it's acknowledged to be the continuation of the race, the continuation of the tribe, of the family. And it's honored and celebrated by everybody, by fathers and brothers, as well as mothers and sisters and aunties. So that was one of the wonderful things I learned. I know people know me best for the red tent, where I sort of imagined red tent where women went during their menstrual periods and when they gave birth and after childbirth. And there actually are, I kind of thought I completely made it up pretty much, but I found out that there are in fact some places in the world that have a kind of, that kind of safe space, sacred space in a lot of cases for women to rest with the support of other women and with the support of the men in their community as well. So that's the positive and the negative, Meclina, that you were talking about. So.
Well, it's so important because we're all learning. And as we learn and we have these conversations, we're able to empower ourselves and say a person who menstruates, right? And to give all those who menstruate their honor and their dignity. It's important to go, well, people who are in impoverished communities, even in some, religious practices, right? There is this idea of this woman is unclean, therefore she can't be participating in X, Y, and Z. And it's important for everyone who's here participating in this conversation to know, like, we're all growing and learning. And as we have these conversations, we hope those of you who are participating tonight feel, more empowered and informed. So this question is for all of you. What do you wish that someone said to you when you were growing up, right, that would help empower you in your identity as someone who menstruates? I mean, and I can go first if you like. I think for me it was, I wish people said, this is not going to destroy your independence, right? As a young person. There was this idea of assumption because I'm the youngest. I have older sisters, I have cousins, I have aunts, but they were off in college and they were busy. And so it was trying to figure out, how do I navigate who I am now and still feel like I can be that independent person and, an athlete and in band and, in theater and feel really confident. What are some things you wish people had said to you that made you feel a little more empowered? And this is open, so unmute yourselves and let's have some fun with it.
I wish somebody had actually taught me about how my body works. I think I got to say, honestly, in doing the research for this book, there were things I didn't, basic things about about having a uterus and how it works that I wasn't clear on. Which is ridiculous. And so I wish I had known that. I think that's powerful to know how your body works and why it works and what would be a problem so that you could ask for help if you were having a problem. But nobody talked to me about that. And even the little bit of sex education I had in middle school, it would have been great to really learn how bodies work, not just my body, but male bodies as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to add to that. I wish that was not said to me. I grew up in a traditional household. I mean, with British ancestors, and every month I was asked if I was ill. And this idea that a period, instead of it representing health and vibrancy and opportunity, was suggested, and I think you're right, Anita, as a misogynistic way of putting women down. Therefore, if you have a period, you are ill. And we should be saying the exact opposite.
I would say for me, I wish someone told me that you are still a girl. You can still do all the things you were doing before you got your period. For so long, there has been this social marginalization of Black girls and Black women's sexuality, where as soon as you get your period, oh, you can have a baby now. You're a young woman now. You're an adult now. No, you are still a young person. You can still do all of the things you were doing before you got your period. And it goes back to what Anita was saying. If you have that knowledge about the anatomy of your body, the physiology of the menstrual cycle, learning the different phases. And that is what we teach our young people. It's like, it's just a process that your body is going through naturally. You are still a young person. You are still a girl. You can still do all the things you were doing before. It doesn't take away from your innocence. Even if society is labeling you as a sexual being, you can have agency over your body, and you know that is not the case. And I think that is something that we still need to work on today, the over-sexualization of Black girls, brown girls, and women as well.
Snaps to what Bria said and everything that has just been said before. I love this question because it asks us to get personal too, and talking about our own periods is activism in and of itself, right? Because we are breaking the taboo. So I just want to say that first of all. We've also been talking a lot, the panelists, about the worlds of connection between us. And I feel like the first story that comes to mind is, I don't know if even Bria or any of you who know me at watching know this story, but when I was 17, I went to India, and I met the organization Action India that was working on distributing pads in villages. And it was like a really random situation that I got there. But after I was like sitting for an hour sweating, as you do in India, and I got up from the pillow I had been sitting on that was totally white, and I had bled all over the pillow, and I was mortified because I thought that I had not known my own flow well enough, and so it was my fault for being irresponsible. That was a message I was told, and that I was like embarrassing everyone else by like making them confront the fact that I was bleeding, even though we were literally having a conversation around menstruation and the work that their organization did to teach menstrual equity. I like had separated that activism from my own self. And so then a non-menstruator went to the store to get me pads, and that had to overcome my own embarrassment about acknowledging my period with a non-menstruator. And it's so funny all these years later that I'm still involved in period advocacy. And I think about that story as having taught me to practice not feeling shameful around my own period, and how grateful I am. But it takes multiple times for people to reaffirm that, like, I've been practicing now talking about my period for a long time. It's not something that shame doesn't like turn off in one conversation. And so I just want to say that for anyone else who might be relating and feeling that shame, that we're all in this journey of unlearning that shame.
I just want to respond one thing. Does it like, we'll know we've really achieved menstrual justice when that happens to somebody, when you bleed, it's not a catastrophe, it's a little accident. That people don't get freaked out, don't have to make jokes, don't have to hide, don't have to cry. And that happens a lot, especially with young kids. But that it was like, oops, excuse me, and that's it. And nobody makes a fuss. Then we will have really moved past this, but we are a very long way, I'm afraid, from that. So any stories about people dealing with it well as a whoops, as opposed to a catastrophe, I think those stories are really important to tell.
I agree. They're imperative to tell, because then it starts to normalize, right, our experiences. And I was sharing with the panelists before about this TikTok trend of, non-menstruators giving tips and advice of how to be supportive and how to help. And those little things that start to ingrain our culture help people to feel like, oh, okay, well, it's okay to talk about this. It's okay. It's, but as we were talking about this, it made me want to go to Bria and say, Bria, you mentioned the period party in Boston and then in DC. We're all curious. We want to know a little bit more about this party and what you've seen as the outcome from having these parties.
Yes, and so what inspired me to host this period party in Roxbury was because my first period experience was a catastrophe. And I wasn't aware of what was going on in my body. And with experiencing dysmenorrhea, meaning painful periods, I hated my period. I dreaded it every month. And so when I was speaking with Arvid, and I said, I think it's important for people to learn about the menstrual cycle. I didn't really start embracing my period until I was in college. And one of my friends said, Bria, do you poop a lot on your period? And at first I was like, why is she asking me this question? And then I realized actually I do poop a lot. And then it made me research as to why. And then I learned more about prostaglandins and what's physiologically happening in your body and these chemicals, which can cause the pooping and the bloating and the fatigue and the pain. And so the more I started learning about my body, the more I embraced it and loved it. And so I said, let's host a Love Your Menses event. Where you may not love your menses, but you love yourself enough to advocate for your reproductive health, and you will do anything that you can in order to be well throughout your reproductive years and post-reproductive years. And so whenever anyone asks me, well, why love your menses? It's because you love yourself enough and you love other menstruators in your life to advocate for them as well when they can. And so during this party, we connected medical professionals and public health professionals with young people in the pre-pubertal and early pubertal stages so they can learn about their bodies and menstruation before they actually get their first period. And we also tell them, you know, menstruation, puberty doesn't start at menstruation. Puberty happens years before you actually get your first period. And so if you're aware of these bodily changes, then when you do get your period, it's just like, okay, just another change I'm going through. And then what I found special at that event was the intergenerational conversations that we had. We had mothers, grandmothers, aunties, uncles, a part of the conversation talking about menstruation, because most households are multi-generational. And when grandma was growing up, it was a stigma, it was a taboo to talk about your period. But if grandma is raising their grandchild, and if grandma, you know, didn't have the body autonomy and wasn't able to freely talk about their periods and about their own reproductive health issues, how can we expect them to teach the young person in their life? And so that is an integral part of Love Your Menses and the work that we do, is these intergenerational conversations in the community, bringing people together to talk about all things periods.
I'm laughing at Anita because as you were saying that, Bria, I was thinking of a quote that Anita has: if you want to understand any woman, you must first ask about her mother. And, you know, bringing it back to this intergenerational conversation of, you know, if there was lack of access because there was control of information, right? And women, well, that's a whole nother conversation we can get into about us having the right to have a mortgage, having the right to have our own bank account, having the right to know about our body and how it functions was denied for previous generations. You know, as we dive deeper into this conversation, we look, right, at how we support each other intergenerationally. Karen, Anita, you know, sitting on this conversation tonight, I imagine this is not something you would be talking about, you know, 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago.
Well, I did a little writing about this in the past, not in a kind of from a big lens, but from a, you know, up close. When writing about, I wrote a column, personal column, and wrote about raising a daughter and naming the parts of her body and trying to be there for her, and, you know, always ready to answer a question. If I don't know the answer, we'll go find it together. That certainly was not my experience with my mother and most of the people that I grew up. One of the people that I interviewed, as thanks to Bria, a physician, an adolescent gynecologist, Bria will remember her name. She said, what I really love is to have 2 generations in the room, if not 3 generations in the room, when I'm talking to a teenager, because I know that everybody needs to learn this together, and that by learning it together, it gets rid of a lot of the stigma. So there's so much education that needs to go on. Certainly we want to talk about young people, but, you know, for multi-generations, for parents, for new parents, to say, you know, this is part of your baby girl's body. This is, you know, the baby has a uterus, will have a uterus someday. And that's part of postpartum conversation at some point about naming the parts of the body and being okay with naming the parts of the body. So again, I think we're living in a moment of time where we really are talking about this in a way that publicly and globally, not just in a privileged, North America, but around the world, people are talking about menstruation in ways on the air and in comedy and in theaters and as well as these sort of like dedicated conversations. It's no longer quite the taboo that it was. We have a long way to go, but the door is open a crack.
And for me, it's more about this idea of the idea that we're still dealing with issues that relate to women's rights. I mean, we're back in the Supreme Court around, it is mind-blowing to think that we have gone backwards as it relates to women's rights in terms of abortions, and the two are absolutely connected. I think this, for me, the idea of a woman's body is still under attack, and no doubt this was not part of my conversation when I first got my period. But it sure is part of the conversation around my daughter right now, who's in her mid-20s, and I think that we still have to really push hard to change the narrative around women's rights. And I'm curious to ask Sasha about the work and how these two are related, and how you're seeing that in terms of your legislation and activism.
I love that you said that, Karen, because that's exactly who I was going to next.
Awesome. Yes, I'm so glad that you both have brought up the misogyny aspect around this, because, Mass Now is fighting for over 35 bills on our legislative agenda. It's not going to take just one magic bullet in order to create the feminist democracy that people have been working for generations, right? Like, this is not a new issue either. What is so interesting to see in this work, like, we know we've been bleeding forever, and yet the fact that it has never been introduced in the Massachusetts legislature ever as a topic before 2019 speaks to the fact that we haven't had menstruators elected to office in the state house, of course. And so maybe if we had more menstruators, they would look around and say, what should be available, just like toilet paper, when we are considering toilet paper an essential item before the pandemic, but even now more so during the pandemic. And also the IM bill, I think, would be passed faster than it's going right now if we didn't have to teach the non-menstruators what period poverty is and what periods are. Like, just to start with that. In fact, this is why we need menstruation education in Massachusetts, but why we also need comprehensive sex education in Massachusetts, because we're also one of a few states in the country that does not have legislation to say that if we teach sex ed, not that we have to, but if we teach it, it needs to be medically accurate. Like, that is the bar we need to set, because students are being taught lies in Massachusetts right now. And the health ed curriculum in Massachusetts hasn't been updated since I was born 30 years ago. And a lot has changed in science, not only in teaching, in the last 30 years. And so there really is a long way to go. Even here in Massachusetts, a seemingly progressive state, we only have a few cities across the state that have actually taken the steps to make menstrual products free in state buildings and in schools. Shelters are still relying on donations. And we know that if someone is in a shelter, then they cannot afford menstrual products. If you ever have to choose between food and menstrual products, between rent and menstrual products, then that is what period poverty is. We know that 1 in 7 children in Massachusetts are living in poverty. And so we know that period poverty is an issue. And yet we still, at Mass Now, have been doing research in collaboration with the Department of Public Health and the Sheriff's Association in order to collect surveys, both the qualitative surveys of people's stories, but they want to see the data to show that students are missing school because they don't have access to menstrual products. They will attend school more if they can get them in the bathroom and they don't need to ask permission, miss class time, go through the shame and stigma of asking permission for it. And so everyone is probably like angry right now listening to me thinking like, how do we not have this basic necessity right here in Massachusetts? We have we have the biggest state budget than we've ever had in our history. $62 billion. We can afford menstrual products. It's so cheap. What you can do is you can call your legislator or write your legislator, your state rep or your state senator, and ask them to pass the IAM bill this session. I'll put a link in the chat really quick. That's easy. So you can just type in your name and your address. And what would be really great is, in addition to using our talking points as inspiration, add in your period story. It could be really easy, casual, does not need citations. It's just, have you ever gotten your period and not had the products you needed? Ever? Probably. Then that is your truth and your testimony. And legislators need to hear from you because they have so many priorities, especially with the pandemic right now. You know, if only bills that they're going to pass are ones that they are hearing from their constituents who keep them elected are a priority for them. And so if we could get everyone who's here tonight to email their legislator, that would make a huge difference in passing the needle. I also see that a lot of people here are not from Massachusetts, which is super cool. And so I'll just say right now that I'll also put a link in the chat to a new initiative that I'm starting with some other menstrual activists around the country to support groups passing period policy on the state level, and then using our collective power and voices to pass policy in DC. Because on the federal level, that is where you can fund menstrual products for SNAP. Because right now, if you're receiving food stamps, SNAP benefits doesn't cover menstrual products. If FEMA funds don't also. And so
diapers. Let's put that in there too. Menstrual products and diapers are not, they're not considered essential.
So may I just point out one way in which art can inspire activism. So there are two pieces in the current show, which are tzedakah boxes, which are these Jewish containers. We use them in our Jewish tradition, in which we collect coins and they are then given away to charity. There are two pieces currently in the show that are dedicated to two women who have deeply inspired me in my life. These two boxes are inspiring an outdoor, three multi-city installation of big life-size boxes, which will each be tied to a real life issue currently on the docket, either in the legislator or in the public opinion, or sometimes both. They will be in downtown Boston come the month of May. And I'll be damned if period poverty is not part of this issue in downtown Boston come. And so this is the example of how art can inspire activism. And I'm just getting a text about a tampon vending machine for free. So we've got to figure out how to, if we use art to elevate the conversation and impact the outcome, this is artivism.
I couldn't have said it better. And there's so many other questions I would love to ask, but time is flying by. I want to make sure we give enough time for all of the audience members that have questions for you. So I'm going to open it up. If you have a question, to please drop it into the Q&A, and we're going to do our best to see how many of these we can get to. And then again, if you did not see, look in the chat area. Sasha did put up a link there. And okay, so Jen Mergel from Olmsted Now had a couple of questions. She wanted to know if you knew about this new publication called Designing Motherhood. Yes, you do. Okay, so Sasha, you want to kind of take us a little bit through it?
Sure. I just saw it in Philly. Shout out to Michelle Fisher from the MFA, and who I know didn't put it together alone, but I can't remember her partner's name at the top of my head. But it was a great show because it shows different menstrual products in a museum, as well as other birthing devices. what I think is also really interesting about this show is that I learned about it from a New York Times article that said it was coming to the MFA in Boston, but it's not. They're not having the show after all because they don't think people would come to see about a show about birthing devices or menstruation. And that is exactly why we need to be supporting artists like Karen who are doing period art and showing that there is an audience for it, because it's infuriating. But the book is out, and so you can see the article, the shows through the book. And maybe there'll be another museum in Boston that will host the show sometime soon.
Okay, good. Let me see if there's a few in the chat and there's a few in Q&A. Oh, FYI, Amber Winnick, am I saying that correctly, Jen? I hope I am, is another organizer and author that also is a supporter. If there's any other questions that I have missed, please go ahead and just put it in the Q&A. And just to reiterate, I think action steps are so important for people to have, and everyone is absorbing a lot of information tonight. So Sasha, Anita, yes, I'm going to ask if you guys could just reiterate some of those action steps that can be really helpful.
Well, I have a little tiny one. It's not so tiny. You should put period products out in your bathroom at home. You put it on the vanity in the bathroom that your guests use. Whether or not anybody ever uses them, put them out front and center somewhere, the way you have, soap and maybe hand lotion and towels. It's a necessity. So you want to put it in front of people wherever you are. If you belong to a church or a synagogue or a mosque, are there period products in your house of worship? If not, there should be. So I know in synagogues for weddings, there are, bat mitzvahs, they put them out, but they should be there all the time. And very often, all you have to do is bring it up in an institution and they go, oh, never thought of that. Of course, let's do that. So, the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem is the first place I saw baskets put out. This is years ago, 2-3 years ago, of period products. And I was like blown away. So somebody at the museum got it. So we can model this kind of behavior no matter where we are. It's a little thing. We can all do that. And we can write to our legislators too.
Sasha, do you want to give us just a quick rundown of those action steps?
Yeah.
And any others that you think would be helpful and beneficial. And of course, Bria, we're going to be talking to you about period parties in a second.
I mean, talking about it is huge. It's practice for ourselves and the people that we bring into this movement by giving them permission to. Contacting your legislators, can't stress it enough. And there's so many different ways that you can do that. You can use the form, you can give them a call, and their staff person will take note of the phone call. You can make period art also and post about it on social media and send that to your legislator. They're looking to see who tags them on social media also.
What is the social, sorry to cut you off, but what is the hashtag? Do you know?
Great question. So we use I am for menstrual access for the I am bill. But if you Google your state rep or state senator's name and then tag them, for sure going to get their attention. And then the last thing I'll say is that many shelters don't have menstrual products. And so if you, for this giving season, would like to host a period product drive for your local shelter, they're honestly probably too overwhelmed to recruit. They don't have capacity often to ask for menstrual products, but they are 100% needed. And so proactively doing a drive for your local shelter and supporting organizations like Love Your Menses and Mass Now are really important ways to help meet the need right now. Also, actually, I'll just say that you might have a community fridge in your neighborhood. Those have popped up a lot over the pandemic as proof that our mutual aid is working faster than the state. And I've seen a lot of people add menstrual products to the community fridges as another idea.
Yeah, and add on to community colleges Oftentimes we'll have a food pantry. That's another place that is really would be in need. No one will say there's a need, but there's a need. And so being able to do that as well is so important. Bria, talk to us a little bit about the period parties. And is this something that you hope can develop into more? And, if we wanted to have a period party, what are some things that we can do on a micro level?
Yes. So on a micro level, it could be as simple as just talking about menstruation, inviting maybe an OBGYN over, or you're just sharing period stories, making it intergenerational. It could be in your house, it could be at a community center. If you're an educator, I remember I taught 5th grade. And so I always had a girls group after school where we just talked about these things. I know it can be difficult for parents and guardians to have this conversation with their young people. Our world is constantly evolving and changing, and it's okay not to know. But it's okay to ask for help and come to people like us at Love Your Menses, where we provide the menstrual education and help you have these conversations with the young person in your life. One thing that I found super effective when I was a young person that I continue to do today is whenever I'm hosting a sister circle, I have my young people write any question that they have related to their body, their sexuality in a box anonymously, and I answer it. And I always tell them it can be as raunchy as you want it to be. Any question that you have about your body, your period, I will answer it. And I found that to be so liberating when I was a teenager, working as a peer leader at Teen Voices, that I continue that legacy today through Love Your Menses. And there's a lot of young people who have questions about their bodies, but don't have anyone to talk to about it. And so they go to Google and they self-diagnose themselves and they get worried. And then, for so long, they go through these years not knowing what's going on in their bodies. And if we really want to reduce reproductive health issues and the prevalence, we have to make sure we're having these conversations at an early age. And so just opening that door for young people and older people as well. Adults still have their own reproductive health challenges that they experience, that they have questions that they need answered. There's a lot of people where it takes years before you're properly diagnosed with endometriosis or fibroids or polycystic ovarian syndrome. And also, I think it's important to say to people, period pain is not normal. It is not normal to say, oh, you have pain, that's just a part of having your menses. No, it's important to get the help that you need. And so I think everyone can be a menstrual champion. You all can be period champions. Whether you're connecting someone to a resource, you're providing them with the education that they need, you're being a listening ear to the questions that they have about their bodies or, their reproductive health or their sexuality, it will go a long way. And lastly, one thing I'm a true advocate for is safety, making sure that the products we give out to people are safe and toxic free. There's a lot of products that contain endocrine disrupting chemicals and toxic chemicals that negatively affect our reproductive health. And so it's important to make sure the products we give out are safe as well.
Thank you so much. I can't believe that we're almost wrapping up. Anita, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to talk about men and boys for a minute. One of the things I learned when I was working on this book, I interviewed a couple of health educators who are men, and they talked very much about how important it is to have everybody in the same room to talk about health education, about the body. For lots of different reasons. One of them is for kids who are not sure which room they should go to. Having to make a choice puts them in a tough position of maybe either outing themselves or just going someplace and not learning what they need to know about both bodies. But he was also talking about how boys in particular need to have the language to get the empathy, to have a shared language. We should all have a shared language about what's happening in each other's bodies. And that empathy is modeled by teachers, and there need to be male teachers as well to model for everybody, for girls as well as boys, and to include them. I also like to hold up stories of men who are period champions too. One of my favorite stories in the book is a cab driver from South Africa who was driving kids to and from school and noticed bloody tissues in the back seat and realized that the girls didn't have period products. So what he did, he didn't kick the girls out. He went and bought pads, put them on the dashboard, and they were there for anyone to take whenever they needed it. And if the boys started razzing the girls, he made them stop and act respectfully. And he was, you know, he was a kind of a hero. He was on television, and he was a model for about what a great guy who behaved about menstruation in a very matter-of-fact and healthy and helpful way. And we need to hold up those stories, and we need to be talking to our sons and our friends and our fathers and our brothers as well. And that can be hard. It's different. It's a different kind of conversation. But boy, the number of men when I started having this conversation, when I started writing the book, was like, you know, they didn't get it. And I said, are you carrying toilet paper in your pocket? And there was a lot of that. Oh, right. So there's a lot of education that has to happen in schools and around the dinner table. And someday we'll all be able to get up at the dinner table and say, does anybody here have a tampon, regardless of who's at the table? And nobody will gasp. And that is starting to happen in some safe places.
Yeah. Lizzie, we just want to say thank you for your comment. She was just reiterating how it's so important to, you know, we have to dismantle the shame around menstruation and really all of this stigmatizing that's been going on for so many generations. And that's what we're doing here tonight. I feel that we're all participating in this dialogue. There's been so many amazing chats that have been going on this evening, and people relating their own personal stories and experiences. You know, and I think it's important that we feel we can have a little bit of transparency, that we can be a little vulnerable, that we can share these stories so we can normalize it. Karen, I didn't want to cut you off, so I wanted to give you the floor. Oh no? Okay, I thought you were getting ready to say something. But as we wrap up, there is there's a question of, Anita, is there a YouTube video of the cab driver? Do you know if that's on YouTube?
I got all of this obviously on the internet, and I saw a TV report of him being featured it's a few years ago. I think it's footnoted somewhere in the book. I could look it up. Yeah, he was on South African television for a few days, maybe longer than that. So that's where I found out about it, and I got to actually watch him being interviewed. So just go look.
That sounds great. What I really would love to also iterate as we wrap up is this conversation is just beginning. This is not the end. This is us starting the next page of this conversation. I hope that tonight that you share this story about what we discussed tonight with your friends and your family. I hope that you take the time to do the action steps and to reach out to these incredible people who are doing such necessary work. And just remember, it only takes a few dollars and a few moments of your time to pick up some products and deliver them to a local area that is of need. I think it's very important that we continue these conversations, and please reach out to Beacon Gallery so that if you have more questions or there's other ways you'd like to support, you can contact us here, and Christine will be able to direct you to the right people. I want to say thank you so much to all of you, Anita, Bria, Sasha, and Karen. Thank you so much for tonight.
Thank you so much for moderating this awesome conversation, Meclina. Thank you, Christine, too.
Yes, thank you, Christine. And thank you for all of you who've joined tonight. Have a great night, everybody.